We are back on the Rational Boomer podcast. Hopefully, your day is going well. It's Saturday. Got through another week and it's been a busy one. Lots of things happening. Lots of things happened yesterday, things we have to talk about. So we'll get into it right away. But first, we have some emails. Now, this first one comes from Darren. Now, you remember Darren was on the show recently. He's a gentleman from Montana, very bright, very insightful guy, a good guy, very good guy. And I was reading an email from him recently, and he was talking about his significant other. And I made a comment about a word he used because I wasn't sure if it was acceptable or not. And now he's kind of concerned about what he said. And I'm just going to tell you, Darren, don't worry about it. It's not a big deal. We're all friends here. We're all kind of a family. Um, it's in my mind, it's always more about intention than it is the actual word. And the word he used, and I'll just say it here, my wife and everybody's told me it's not acceptable. Now, back when I was young, it was used all the time, but he was referring to his wife, who is mixed race. I think it's his wife or his girlfriend, and he referred to her as a mulatto. Now, I'm not up to speed with the words that are acceptable and unacceptable, but I thought I'd heard that that was unacceptable. And I made a point to mention it when I read the email. So he writes an email yesterday that I'm going to give you right now. He says, "Please tell your listeners that I had no idea that the word I used was not correct. I'm sorry if I offended anyone who listens, especially old soul. Shit, I told you I'm about as sharp as a marble. The term now will be biracial. Guess I learned again about implicit bias. Nothing like being a stupid hayseed. Darren." I'm guessing he talked to his significant other and said to her, what's he mean? That's not right. And she probably straightened him out. Darren, don't worry about it. Like I said, you're among friends here, friends, family, and we all have a lot to learn, especially when it comes to racial things. I mean, I grew up in the 60s and the 70s, and racism back then was accepted, and the words that were used back then by people in my own family um, now seem to be abhorrent. Darren, if this will make you feel any better, I said something on the air when I was in radio one time, and I was talking about my grandfather and another guy in my neighborhood. Now, these guys were born in in the 1920s or teens, so they were older guys, and they had a different perspective on, how you refer to other people. And I was telling a story, and I heard this word from this gentleman that I'm going to tell you about now, but also from my grandfather. They were both about the same age, both born in the late teens and 20s. And when we were little kids, we'd ride our bikes around. At the end of the block was this garage where they kept newspapers. They collected newspapers. That back in the day, that was the thing. You collected newspapers and turned them in, and it was for donations and that sort of stuff. Now, the guy that ran this particular garage was an angry motherfucker, an angry old motherfucker. And he used to yell at us and chase us and stuff. And uh, I don't know why. We were just kids goofing off. Well, one time we were out driving around on the lot where that garage was, and he came out of nowhere and he came at us. And I was so scared, I was off my bike. I just took off and left my bike back. Now, the guy said to me as I was walking away, and I'd heard this word before from my grandfather. He talked about it when he was talking about when he was a child. Anyway, he says, "You better come back here or I'm going to give this to the Sheeny." I didn't know what the fuck a Sheeny was. Had no idea. In fact, I had no idea until I said it on the air and somebody says, that's kind of a derogatory term for people that are Jewish. I had no fucking idea. I had no idea. And fortunately, the people who listened didn't hold me accountable for it because they knew it was completely innocent and I didn't know any different. So Darren, I've done the same thing, and a lot of people have done the same thing. We're all learning here. For many years, when racism was buried under rocks, we thought things were getting better, but we really had no idea. The fact that racism has been brought to the top now, I think this is a good learning experience for all of us. It's just a word ultimately. I wouldn't worry about it. Like I said, we're among friends here, and it's about intent more than it is the word. So I don't want you to feel bad about it or worry about it. And maybe you should set something up to be back on the show. It's always good to get back on the horse. I don't want you to feel bad about it. All right. The next one comes from Gary. He says, I have another question maybe you can answer. I'm Canadian, so I don't understand how one person can hold up um, uh, all your military promotions. How can one person have this much power? Thanks again, Gary. Now, I'm sure he's talking about Tommy Tuberville. And frankly, I don't know all the details. There's procedures and processes within the Senate, and somehow he's able to block votes on things regarding the military and the promotions and stuff. And I don't honestly know how he does it really. I mean, I suppose I could have Googled it and read you the copy. Somebody asked me one time, and I went and Googled it, and I said, "Here, this is from NPR. This is what it said." I didn't even read it. Tommy Tuberville is a special kind of piece of shit. He's a guy that realizes that there are loopholes in our government and in our Congress that can be exploited. Now, most people in the past never did that sort of thing, but this piece of shit did. And he's getting all kinds of heat now. He's gotten called out by virtually every leader of every military branch. He's getting called out by his own state, but still he's holding strong. What he's actually doing has to do with gumming up the process and not allowing votes because they need the vote to get it done, and he's stopping it from being done. So I can't give you a specific example. If you really want to know, I'll Google it and then I'll have it for tomorrow's show. The fact of the matter is he's doing it. He's got to be stopped. And frankly, the Democrats in the Senate need to step it up a bit. I know that Chuck Schumer and some of the other senators, Democratic senators, have been getting a little shit about it. And so hopefully they can apply enough pressure to get this bullshit out of the way. All right, the next one comes from Joyce. I just saw the breaking news that the Georgia grand jury recommended indictments for Lindsey Graham, Kelly Loeffler, and David Perdue. Do you think there will be superseding indictments for them once DA Willis has completed her upcoming trials? Joyce. I don't think there's going to be superseding indictments coming from Georgia, from Fani Willis. I found it a little dismaying too that Lindsey Graham, and we're going to talk more about this later on, not too far out here, that Lindsey Graham and Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue weren't indicted. Now that can mean one of a couple of things. That could mean that Fani Willis didn't feel like she had enough evidence to convict them. Now keep in mind, a prosecutor in this situation will typically do the things that she knows she can win. That's why they have 98 and 90% conviction rates. Maybe they didn't feel they had enough evidence. Like, for example, Lindsey Graham, he called twice to Brad Raffensperger, but there were no audio tapes of it. So it's not quite as strong as Donald Trump. Now, the other thing that could be happening here is keep in mind that Fani Willis has said that she has 150 witnesses. That's a shitload of witnesses. So it may be conceivable that one or all of these people that didn't get indicted may be people who are willing now to testify against Donald Trump and the rest of these fucks. We don't know exactly what's going on. I get the impression, though, since we're talking about RICO charges and they indicted 19 people, that it's probably not going to be expanded on unless there's some charges for something totally something else that isn't part of the RICO thing. But I think she's got enough going on with the RICO case without having to get into other areas. So we'll see what happens. Nobody knows really what happened. Um, as people read into this report that came out, we'll find out more and more information, and maybe we'll get some answers from Fonnie Willis or some of the other prosecutors. But for now, we don't know. I mean, the important thing to me is that they've got Donald Trump indicted, Mark Meadows indicted, and Rudy Giuliani indicted, Sidney Powell indicted. They've got a good handful of the criminal fucks indicted. So we've got to be kind of happy with what we've got as opposed to hoping for everything. That said, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's over for Lindsey Graham. One of the reasons they may have done this, Fonnie Willis may have done this, is because Lindsey Graham is a sitting senator. The other two were senators at the time this happened. And maybe she's suggesting that because they were senators, she's leaving it for Jack Smith. And that doesn't mean that Jack Smith isn't going, we know he's going to have superseding indictments. The grand jury got together yesterday or the day before, and maybe these guys end up showing up in those indictments. I don't know for sure, but all we can do is keep our eyes open, hope for the best, and make sure they get that motherfucker Trump. All right. Now, regarding the Georgia indictments, we know, of course, that Mark Meadows had gone to the Georgia court and said, I think that my case should be moved to federal court because I'm special, because I'm a federal employee, because I was just doing my job. Well, the fact of the matter is he wasn't doing his job. Overturning an election isn't in the job description with a chief of staff. I'm sorry, it's just not. And I told you that I didn't think that he would be allowed to move to federal court. And yesterday, a federal judge denied Mark Meadows' request that his case be moved out of Georgia into federal court. Now, Meadows, the former White House chief of staff, has been charged with 2 felonies for his role in the Trump campaign's effort to overturn Georgia's 2020 election. Meadows, who's facing a trial along with Trump and 17 other defendants in the case, quickly filed an appeal to the decision by the U.S. District Judge Steve Jones. Well, of course, he filed an appeal. That's what Republicans do. They appeal and they appeal until they can't appeal anymore. Here's what I'm going to tell you. He won't win that appeal, and he won't win any successive appeal, even with the Supreme Court. Now, yesterday, Donald Trump also came out and he says, he filed something with the court and he says, I may be looking to move to a federal court too. And it struck me as strange. One word struck me strange. He said, I may. Not saying I am or I'm not. He's saying, I might. Now, why would he do that? Well, he likes to be in the news, and he figures anything he does will bring his name up in the news, and he sees that as a positive. He also might have been waiting to see what happened with Meadows in order to decide whether or not he tries to move to a federal court. Now, keep in mind, Donald Trump tried this up in the Manhattan district. They wanted to move that to a federal court, and the judge said, fuck yourself. So I expect much of the same here. If they're not moving Meadows, they're not moving Trump or any of the other fucks that are asking about being moved. It's just a way to cause delays or upheaval or chaos or whatever it is they want to do. Now, in his argument for the case to be moved to federal court, Meadows claimed that the charges concern his official duties as a federal officer. But the judge ruled that Meadows had not met his burden of proof that the case should be moved to federal court, where the juror pool would be more politically diverse than that of Georgia's Fulton County, and defendants would have their possibility of a Trump-nominated judge overseeing the trial. Which I find strange, because the judge in the Georgia trial is a Republican, is a member of the Federalist Society. He's a young guy, but you would think that's the kind of guy they would want to face. It's not like we've got an Obama or a Biden appointed judge in this case. So we'll see what Meadows says. We'll see if Meadows talks at all. And we'll certainly be waiting to hear from Donald Trump, because that motherfucker cannot shut up. Now, the judge also noted that Meadows' job as a White House chief of staff did not include working with or working for the Trump campaign, and that the U.S. Constitution does not provide any basis for executive branch involvement with the state election and post-election procedures. Now, he went down there. He's a federal officer, but what he was doing had nothing to do with his job. I said that beforehand. Everybody said that beforehand, but somehow Mark Meadows thought he would win. Well, he fucking didn't. Now, the charges against Meadows, who has pleaded not guilty, concern him pressuring Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger to overturn the certification of the state's election results. A recording of the phone call, which Trump was also on, was publicly released following the election. Now, this is a big win for the Fulton County District Attorney Fonnie Willis, who brought the state racketeering charges. It does not bode well for Trump and others who've said they'd likely petition to move their cases to federal court. In fact, it almost guarantees that they will fucking lose. Now, in addition to potentially providing a friendlier judge and jury, a move to federal court would test the limits of Georgia's Racketeering, Influence, and Corrupt Organization Act, under which the defendants are charged, as federal judge could field legal challenges to the state. It would also spare the defendants from having their trials televised, as cameras are banned in federal court. And honestly, I think that was probably the biggest deal. It's one thing to be in court and be on trial for felonies or even misdemeanors. But we know what happens when these Republicans go to court. They could go in there and get their asses whipped, and then they'll come out talking about how they won, how it was a great day for them. Now, you and I know better. But those dumb Trump-fucks, the MAGA, the base, they'll say, see, it went great, it went great. And they will continue to do that until such time they're handcuffed, shackled, and led off to jail. That's what they do. Having it on TV changes everything. Because once these trials are on TV, you can be guaranteed that Donald Trump will be happy, because the ratings will be big. Where Donald Trump won't be happy is the information that's delivered in these broadcasts. And since the viewership will be high, there'll be Republicans and Trump-fucks alike watching these events. And then they'll be able to see the actual facts, hear the witnesses, and watch the defendants as they sit there on trial. Then there's no excuse. They've heard what the truth is. They've heard the facts and evidence. Now, the question would be then, will they still follow Donald Trump? Well, some might, but some will likely fade away and step away from Donald Trump. And that's all we can hope for, and all we need, frankly. People always say to me, you'll never change the minds of MAGA folks, so why even do it? Well, I agree with you. You can't change the minds of MAGA folks. You just can't. But we don't need to change the minds of everyone. We just need to change the minds of enough people, independents, reasonable-minded Republicans, maybe some of the dumber Republicans that just can't wrap their head around the fact that Donald Trump is guilty, but there's the fucking evidence. All we have to do is win an election. We don't have to wipe them out completely yet. Once the election occurs in 2024 and we have the House and the Senate and the White House, then we proceed to wipe them off the playing field. And I'm not talking about physical things. I'm talking about political, electoral things. We need to wipe them out, because if we leave one, it's like cancer and it can grow and it will grow. So we have to be very careful to be watching for every one of these fucks that are still out there. The Paul Gosars, the Marjorie Taylor Greens, the Matt Gaetz. We need these fuckers gone because they are doing nothing but putting this country at risk. Now, we know a special grand jury convened in Georgia, and in their report, which was released now, there was a bunch of additional indictments that went beyond those sought last month by Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis. If you look at the report, there were probably twice as many suggestions for indictments than actually came through when Fani Willis set up the indictment and issued the indictment. So there were 19 or 20 others that were recommended to be indicted, but were not indicted, as we talked about in the email earlier. Now, according to the grand jury's report made public Friday, the panel believed multiple others should be criminally charged for plotting to overturn the results of the 2020 election. They include Senator Lindsey Graham, former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, and former U.S. Senators David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler, both Republicans from Georgia. At this point, they were not ultimately indicted. The panel had significant disagreements about some individuals. The vote to recommend a racketeering-related indictment for Graham broke down to 13 yeas, 7 nays, and 1 abstention. For Perdue, the vote broke down 17 yeas and 4 nays. For Loeffler, it was 14 yeas and 6 nays and 1 abstention. So it was recommended that they be indicted, but for whatever reason, Fani Willis chose not to do that. Now, Fani Willis is a very intelligent woman. She's quite an accomplished district attorney, so I'm not going to even question what was in her mind when she decided to do that. I can assume that there was good reason for it, and it was in the best interest of her case. Now, Perdue was recommended for a second indictment over false statements about the election. Of course, Willis's exact reasons for seeking the indictments she did are not entirely clear. Flynn was not indicted on racketeering, even though the panel overwhelmingly signaled that he should be in a vote of 20 yeas to 1 nay. Why not Michael Flynn? That's a good question, unless Michael Flynn is going to show up in the federal indictments from Jack Smith. You have to believe that Fani Willis and Jack Smith and maybe even Alvin Bragg have spoken about the things they are going to do. Now, one of Trump's attorneys, the one that apparently all the other attorneys hate, Boris Epstein, then there was Lynn Wood and Cleta Mitchell, they received the same 20-1 vote on alleged conspiracy, but not ultimately indicted either. That seems like pretty overwhelming odds. If 20 people said we need to indict them, you have to wonder what was going on in Fani Willis's mind. We don't know that now. And as I said, I have to trust Fani Willis because she's been doing nothing but winning up to this point. Now, the panel also considered the roles of more than a dozen alternate electors. Only 3 were charged by Willis. The plot to overturn the results of the election, including former alternate slates of electoral college members who would be loyal to former President Donald Trump. Theoretically, theoretically allow his allies in Congress to hand him another term. They wanted to get it back to the states and let the states decide who's going to be president, even though Joe Biden won by 7 million votes and like 70 electoral votes. It wasn't even close, frankly. Now, Lindsey Graham's offenses, alleged offenses, stem from a highly unusual call he placed to Georgia's Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger in the days after the 2020 election with questions about mail-in ballots in the state. The senator from South Carolina said Friday he was surprised to hear the jury wanted him charged. Yeah, you seem pretty nervous, Lindsey. You were crying and whining. I don't think you were surprised that you didn't get indicted. Now the question is, why didn't you get indicted? Did you do a little flipping, Lindsey? You going to tell on your Lord and Savior Donald Trump? If you are going to testify, what's going to happen then? How do you think Donald Trump is going to react? I'm sure he's thinking about that as a possibility, but that's better than sitting in jail, isn't it, Lindsey? Actually, you might like it there. You might be very popular there. Now, as a special purpose grand jury, the group did not have the power to indict anyone. They couldn't do it. They had to go from the special grand jury over to the regular grand jury, and that's where the indictments came from. But the interesting thing is we know they had evidence from 75 witnesses, most of whom were under oath. They wrapped up their work by compiling a final report in January. So it's been, 8-9 months since that report was done. The media really wanted them to release it right away. Fani Willis did not because she thought it might put witnesses and such in danger and that it might hurt her case. So the judge released little bits and pieces of things, but for the most part held it back. Now that the indictments are out, there was really no reason to hold it back, and that's why we're seeing it now. Trump was hit with criminal charges in Georgia, along with his former attorneys, Rudy Giuliani, John Eastman, Sidney Powell, Kenneth Chesebro, and a number of allies such as former Chief of Staff Mark Meadows. All 19 of the defendants pleaded not guilty. Now, Kenneth Chesebro wants to move his court case to the federal courts too. And if they didn't do it for Mark Meadows, Kenneth Chesebro has very little, if any, choice or chance in doing this. We know at this point Kenneth Chesebro and Sidney Powell are scheduled to start their trial on October 23rd. We're talking, 45 days? Yeah, that should be interesting to see how that plays out. And it will be interesting to see how this affects Donald Trump. It's not good for Donald Trump. It's not good for him at all. Now, as I was talking about Lindsey Graham, he was not indicted, but he showed up on the list and that the special grand jury wanted him indicted. Now, Graham said he was totally surprised by the revelation that a Georgia grand jury recommended that he be criminally charged. And when I was watching the video of him talking, he was almost, I wouldn't say relieved, but he was a little cocky. He was trying to be a nice guy, and he says, what I did was consistent with my job as being a U.S. Senator, chair of the Judiciary Committee, Graham told reporters in South Carolina. I think this is the part I like. I think the system in this country is getting off the rails, and we have to be careful not to use the legal system as a political tool. Why, Lindsey, that's a wonderful idea. I'm glad you thought of it. You got to be familiar with it too, because it's not unlike what the Republicans are doing with Hunter Biden and Joe Biden and using it as a political tool. So, Lindsey, it would seem like you're against it unless you're doing it, right? Right? Yeah, you motherfuckers are just ridiculous. And here's the thing, Lindsey. What you did, there's absolute evidence that you did it. Hunter Biden and Joe Biden, we have yet to see any evidence, and you've been working on this motherfucker for 5 years, even under Donald Trump's administration. You have found nothing. But you're so desperate, you keep trying to pull this to the surface so that you can try to make Joe Biden look bad, because that's your strategy in any election. Taint or stain the reputation of whoever your opponent, your Democratic opponent is. Well, it hasn't been working, and it's certainly not going to work this time around. And Lindsey, you may be off the hook in Georgia. That is, of course, unless you're going to testify and you've rolled on Donald Trump. But I wouldn't get too cocky yet, because there's still more coming from Jack Smith and the federal courts, and you just might be in there. But even if you're not, with all the evidence that's going to come out in these trials, I'm taking a wild guess here, but Lindsey, I think your career as a politician is over. I think people are already getting sick of you in your state. So I wouldn't plan for any long-term stays in Washington, D.C. I have a feeling that next reelection, you aren't going to do so well. Now, of course, the special grand jury, as I mentioned, voted 13-7 to recommend charges against Graham. And frankly, he's the top Republican on the Senate Judiciary Committee now, which is interesting. The senator was not ultimately indicted by Fulton County District Attorney Willis when she brought the charges against former President Trump. Now, according to a special grand jury report, the one that was released, the panel also believed multiple others should be criminally charged for plotting to overturn the results of the 2020 election, including former Trump National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. Now, this is the one that confuses me. This guy is off the rails. He's a conspiracy theorist. He's a piece of shit. There is no reason for them to hold back on Michael Flynn. So the question is, why did they? Now, I can see him coming up in the federal trial with regards to January 6th. He was in the middle of that too, tied to the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers. So maybe his indictment is yet to come. Maybe Jack Smith went to Fonnie Willis and said, Fonnie, just leave him alone. I got him. I want him. I'll take that motherfucker down. And I have to believe, with the superseding indictments inevitably coming out of Jack Smith and the January 6th indictments, he's got to be in the mix there, as much as Jenny Thomas, Roger Stone, and of course the sitting members of Congress. Here's one thing I talked about on TikTok, and I want to mention because it is frustrating to me. If you are to look at all the things that are going wrong in this country, all the things that need to be fixed, I think first and foremost, this is the most important thing. People in the Supreme Court, in the White House, in Congress, they will say all the same things to us. No one is above the law, which is absolutely bullshit. Anybody that's of the elite class, of the ruling class, or they're wealthy, or they're famous, or they're sitting members of Congress, that truly is a two-tier legal system. I know the Republicans want to call it something else, but it is. I mean, you think about this. If you have a president in the Oval Office committing crimes, any crimes, there's a little memo going around the DOJ that says we can't indict a sitting president. Now you get some crazy corrupt fucker who knows this, and they're going to do some stupid shit in the White House, in the Oval Office. We know this because Donald Trump already fucking did it. Okay? Here's another example of this two-tiered system. We heard recently about the conviction of P.D. Navarro for contempt of Congress, right? We're waiting to find out his sentencing. We also know that Steve Bannon was convicted of the same thing and sentenced to 4 months in jail. He's currently out on bail, awaiting his appeal. Now, those two fucks did not respond to subpoenas. They were indicted, convicted, and sentenced. But remember, so was Jim Jordan and some of the other sitting members of Congress that refused to testify, refused to turn over documents. They were never indicted. They were never put on trial. They were never convicted. So we've got these two that weren't sitting members of Congress or politicians in any way. I guess Pete Navarro was inside the administration in some minuscule way, but they go to jail, and the other people, the sitting members of Congress, get away scot-free. That's a little unfair, don't you think? That's what I'm saying. If you have some power, you can get away with anything. Or let's talk about the Supreme Court. We've got Supreme Court justices that grift and take bribes and do horrible shit and then don't recuse themselves in cases where they should recuse themselves. Alito just did one yesterday. And the problem with the Supreme Court, there is no code of ethics, which blows my fucking mind. If anybody should have a code of ethics, it's the highest court in the land, but they don't. They feel like they can get away with anything and they just do it. And then they explain it away and there is no accountability. I think this is one of the biggest problems in this country right now because we all talk about corruption in the Supreme Court, in the DOJ, in the White House, in Congress. And the reason we have that corruption and criminality is because there's no accountability. They know they can do whatever the fuck they want, insider trading, whatever the fuck they want, and nothing is going to happen for them. They'll always come out and say, well, you can't indict a president or a senator. You can't charge a representative because it wouldn't be good for the country. It'd be too divisive, which is absolute bullshit. Those explanations came from the very people that would be affected by these indictments. We need to straighten that shit out. We need to get it right. If we should expect people being above reproach, it should be in our government. But when they're allowed to run roughshod and do whatever they fucking want, we are going to have a corrupt system. And let's be honest, we do have a corrupt system currently. That's the one thing we have to press for after the 2024 election, whether it be Democrats or Republicans, because they're both guilty of it. We need to push this. We've gotten people afraid enough to rise up and speak out. So we need to take advantage of this time with people are paying attention and people are pushing back. Even if Donald Trump goes to jail and the Republican Party gets crushed, we still got to keep fighting because it's not about Democrats and Republicans, it's about politicians against us. It's always been that way, and that needs to stop. And now that we're invigorated and we are charged up, we need to take it all the way, not just the Republicans, but the whole system. And I don't mean tear down the system. I just mean put the pressure on them, the court of public opinion, if you will. We need to make that effort if we really want to clean this place up, our government specifically. And we can do it. Look at how far we've come with Donald Trump and the Republicans in the last 2.5 years. I know there's some people that say, oh, nothing's going to happen. Well, you're full of shit. You're wrong. But we've come a long way in that time. It has taken time, but we've made progress all through those 2.5 years. And we're going to continue making progress till the job is done. All right. We are going to take a quick break and we'll be right back. We are back on the Rational Boomer podcast. We're going through the happenings of Friday. It was a busy Friday. It's been a busy week altogether. We got the weekend where things will settle down a little bit. Hopefully we can cool things off a bit. But between now and 2024, it's going to be busy in general. So be prepared for that. We'll have plenty to talk about on the Rational Boomer podcast, and of course on TikTok, Instagram, wherever the fuck you watch it. You know what I'm saying. Anyhow, let's get to it. Let's talk about Mike Lindell for a minute. You know, every time you'd see Mike Lindell, he's been this kind of goofy, trying to be a happy guy, and he didn't seem real aggressive or angry. He never seemed angry, in spite of all the things that have gone bad for him. He never seemed to be really angry. I mean, he seemed to be a little unhinged, but you never saw true anger out of him, unless you just saw his recent deposition video that was released. Now that was fucking intriguing. So we know that Mike Lindell is the big pillow guy. He's in the process of facing a whole shitload of defamation lawsuits since the end of 2020's election, when he began pushing the multiple bogus claims about voting machines stealing votes away from Donald Trump. This guy cannot shut up, and he's like a true blue Republican in that he embraces everything, even though he's been proven wrong. He seems so confident. Oh, the evidence is coming. Oh, the witnesses are coming, but they never seem to show up. I mean, he'll have events on his little internet TV show where it says, "Today's the day. We're going to give away the information today." And of course, there is no information. Now, his personality's been taking a little bit of a different presentation, if you will. He's been crying and whining a lot. He's been upset. He says he's lost all his money. He's never been in this much debt. He had to borrow money just to pay bills. Oh, he is a sad sack, isn't he? And who would have ever thought that would happen? I mean, nobody could have foreseen that Mike Lindell would run his company into the ground and he would be broke, except me and you and anybody with an above average intelligence or IQ. But for whatever reason, Mike Lindell didn't see it. Now, there was this investigative reporter at the Washington Post. He flagged a video on Friday from a deposition that Lindell took with an attorney representing Dominion Voting Systems employee Eric Krumer, in which Lindell regularly lashes out at the lawyer. The video shows that MyPillow CEO reacting with hostility to even basic questions from the attorney. And he even got feisty when the attorney simply asked him to confirm that he had only met him a mere 4 minutes prior to starting the taped deposition. The attorney had the audacity to bring something up. I think they were talking about people who maybe complain to MyPillow, and this attorney made reference to lumpy pillows. Oh, that fucking made Lindell mad. What are you talking about, lumpy pillows? There are no lumpy pillows. You don't know what you're talking about. You know, when you watch that deposition, and I encourage you to do so, when you watch it, it's very reminiscent of those depositions we've seen of Roger Stone, where every little thing that is said, he flies off the handle. I mean, when you watch the Roger Stone one, he looks almost demonic, the faces he's making. Mike Lindell's a different situation. He's such a fucking goof. He doesn't come off as scary. He looks more scared himself. I mean, he even called this lawyer at least 4 or 5 times an asshole. Now, I've never been in a deposition, but I have to believe that that is not normal behavior for a deposition. This is kind of a solemn thing. Everybody's expected to tell the truth, but Mike Lindell looked like he was trying to avoid to say anything. So he took offense to everything that this lawyer said. And what little I saw of the deposition, they didn't get much done because Mike was just too angry. And I got to tell you, if you haven't seen the video, you got to check it out. It's very cathartic. It's nice after all these months and months of watching Mike Lindell so assured of himself. Because in this videotape, he is not confident in the least. And since we're talking about people who lack confidence, let's talk about Donald Trump because he's having some fucking bad days. And when he has bad days, it causes him to say some stupid shit. I could do entire shows about the stupid shit that Donald Trump says. But you can see now that he's desperate and he's flailing. Donald Trump said Friday evening that he is, for the first time ever, predicting the United States will enter a Great Depression. You know who's having a Great Depression right now? I bet you it's Melania. She's depressed that she ever fucking saw your face, let alone marry you. Now, citing purportedly bad economic news under the Biden administration, the former president said he expects the country will enter into a Great Depression and notes that the only question is whether it occurs during Biden's term or Trump's. He was speaking at a rally in South Dakota where he took the stage late after being delayed by weather. We're probably headed into a Great Depression, something I've never said before publicly, Trump said. I hate to say that this is the state I have to say it in, whatever the fuck that means. He said, I don't believe I've ever said that before. It's a hell of a statement to make, and I hate to make it. Trump then mused about whether it will occur in the final months of Biden's term, allowing Trump to clean it all up, assuming he wins the election. Now, see, this is an ironic statement because Donald Trump has no chance of winning the presidency under any circumstances. And where the real irony in this is, as much as Donald Trump thinks he might be able to clear up or clean up a Great Depression that's not going to come, wasn't it Joe Biden that had to clean up Donald Trump's recession in 2020? Yeah, I think it was. It was caused by COVID. And that's what they'll say. They say, it's not Donald Trump's fault. It's COVID's fault. I get that a lot from Trump humpers. And I always put it this way to them. I said, look, if Donald Trump had been any kind of president, if he'd done anything at all, the COVID crisis would not have been nearly as bad as what it was. The shutdowns would have never happened. The million dead people would have never happened if not for Donald Trump having done anything. So you can try to blame the economic situation when Donald Trump left office on COVID, but you got to blame COVID on Donald Trump. And if he's responsible for COVID, then he's got to take his lumps for the economic situation. I love how Republicans keep trying to tell us that the economy is bad. Now, I'm not suggesting it couldn't be better for some people out there. I know people are struggling, but the fact of the matter is that the economy is actually pretty good. Joe Biden created 13 million jobs. The GDP is going up. Wages are going up. Manufacturing is going up. If that's not a good economy, what more does there have to be? And they say, well, there's inflation. Yeah, but the inflation has been cut in half in the last year and a half, so it's headed the right way. And let's be perfectly honest, if you want to go someplace where the inflation rate is the highest, well, you just have to go to a red state, and that would be Florida. So fuck you all. This is what Republicans do. They will tell you shit that's categorically untrue. And they will repeat it over and over and over again until people believe it. Now, the vast majority of people won't believe it, but enough of his little MAGA fucking base will. And therein lies the problem. All right, former FBI general counsel and ex-federal prosecutor Andrew Weissman. You see him on TV a lot. My wife always make comments, Andrew Weissman, as if he never sleeps. He's always on some show, but he's a very bright guy and has some great insights. He was part of the Mueller investigation. He reflected on Rudy Giuliani's legal woes on Friday's Deadline White House. Now, Giuliani was indicted in Fulton County, Georgia last month, along with former President Trump and 17 others. We know that. The former personal attorney for Trump was also found liable for defamation last month. when a federal judge issued a summary judgment. A jury trial will determine the damages Giuliani owes. He's also being sued by a former employee who says he coerced her into having sex and alleges he owes her $2 million in unpaid wages. Now, I got to question this woman. You're working with Rudy Giuliani. He wants to hire you. You don't have any particular skills that would work with him, but he's dead set on having you work for him. He tells you that you're going to make $1 million a year. As much as Rudy Giuliani is a criminal and corrupt motherfucker for telling you that, what were you thinking? How could you believe that? You put yourself in that situation. Now, I'm not saying you deserved anything that you got, but come on, we've got to be thinking when we're out there. I mean, shit, when I go on the internet or on my phone, at least 5 times a day, I've got some scammer trying to hit me up with something that's looks pretty credible. But fortunately, I'm aware enough that it's not, so I don't fall into it. But when a greasy little fuck like Rudy Giuliani says, yeah, you can work for me even though you don't have experience, and I'll pay you $1 million a year. Come on. Who's going to believe that? Now, that said, I hope she wins her case and gets her money out of Rudy Giuliani. We may be just talking about naivete with this woman, but Rudy Giuliani is truly a fucking criminal. Now, with all this, he's got incredible legal bills. And Trump held a $100,000 per plate fundraiser for Giuliani at Trump's Bedminster, New Jersey resort on Thursday. It's interesting that he did that, and I'm waiting to find out how it went, if we'll find out at all. How many people with enough money and likes Rudy Giuliani enough to come to a dinner that's going to cost them $100,000 a plate? You almost have to have too much money to fucking do that. So it'll be interesting to see if he makes any money. See, the funny thing is, they said, we're hoping to get $1 million, which is a lot of money, right? $1 million, but that's only selling 10 plates. So I don't think they're expecting a big crowd for this one. But the question is, why is Donald Trump doing this? Why, if a billionaire like Donald Trump wants to do his friend a favor, why doesn't he just write him a check for $1 million and call it a day? Well, because Donald Trump is having his own money woes. And he also wants to keep Giuliani in his pocket because Giuliani could tell some tales, frankly, and throw Donnie under the bus. So Donnie's trying to massage this situation. I'm not going to give you cash. I got my own problems, but I'll put on this benefit for you and we'll see what we get. Now, if they don't get shit, he'll say, Jesus, I tried. But if he does make some money, don't be surprised if Donnie takes a cut, because that's how Donnie does business. When it's all said and done, Rudy Giuliani won't have enough money to do fucking anything. He's selling his apartment for $6 million. And he's struggling at this point. He's trying to maintain a certain lifestyle, but he's not going to be able to do that. He's got these lawsuits, and he's going to have to pay millions of dollars that he doesn't have. Now, while he was on MSNBC, Weissman addressed the possibility that Giuliani may flip on Trump. He said Judge Beryl Howell's summary judgment, which was issued after Giuliani failed to comply with discovery requirements, suggests he may be hiding damning information. And absolutely, you know he is. But the problem is if Rudy Giuliani waits too long, they may not need it. They may not care. And let's be honest, Rudy Giuliani and all these Trump-fucks stood too long with Donald Trump. Even if they get out of this without going to jail, they're going to have the stench of Donald Trump on them for the rest of their lives. And it's going to hold them back. It's going to doom them. Now, some people have said Rudy Giuliani, this Andrew Weissman said, I'm not sure he's a great cooperating witness, but he is in just a world of hurt at this point. He's about to be wiped out financially in the Ruby Freeman Shea Moss case. Those are the two election workers down in Georgia that they called out and fucked up their lives by causing them to get death threats and followed and stalked and all these things. The decision by former Chief Judge Howell makes it plain she believes he's sitting on some discovery that he desperately does not want to turn over. That is why he's in the position he's in with a summary judgment against him and only damages yet to be decided. So that's what's going to happen. And that's what Donald Trump and Rudy Giuliani have in common. When it came to this defamation case, the judge said, yeah, we don't have to go to trial. What you have in documents is enough. We'll just call him guilty and then we'll figure out what he owes the two. So he's already lost that case. And it's very similar to what happened to Donald Trump this past week. There was a second defamation case brought by E. Jean Carroll against Donald Trump. I think she's asking for $10 million. He still has the one he lost already for $5 million. But anyway, in this second defamation case, once again, E. Jean Carroll's lawyer, Kaplan, asked for a summary judgment too, saying, we don't have to do this again. We already did it once. Here's the documents. Make your call. And of course, she found him guilty. And they too are in January, I believe, going to get together for a trial. But that trial isn't to determine whether or not Donald Trump is guilty. He's already been decided that he's guilty. It's only to decide how much he's going to pay E. Jean Carroll again. It'll be interesting to see if Donald Trump has the ignorance to defame her again. It wouldn't surprise me in the least. Now, Weissman said, of course, Giuliani is selling his apartment. That's his last known asset. He said it'll be interesting to see what he does because there's so much pressure on him on the criminal side and the civil side, he concluded. Now, we're talking about some old fucks. Donald Trump, Rudy Giuliani, and some of the others. These guys are old. And with this kind of pressure being put on them, you got to wonder if there isn't a heart attack or two in the offing. I don't know. I mean, I'm not wishing death or illness on anybody, but when you've got a guy in his 70s or his 80s and you got that kind of pressure and you're going to wipe him out financially, I got to think that's a little hard on the ticker. All right, let's talk some shit about a Democrat. I'm not really talking shit about her, but I disagree with something Nancy Pelosi decided to do yesterday. In 2024, she is going to run for re-election. Now, she's no longer the leader in the House. She won't be the Speaker of the House again, but she's going to try to continue by running for a re-election in representing California, specifically San Francisco. Now, the longtime Congresswoman, she stepped down from Democratic leadership at the end of the last Congress, announced Friday that she will run for another term. And I have a problem with that. Again, I'm not talking shit about Nancy Pelosi. Nancy Pelosi has a great track record for decades. She's done a lot of good. She's one of the sharpest, most successful speakers of the House of Representatives has ever seen. But she's 83, and in 2024, she'll be 84. That's too old. Nancy, can't you look out your door down the hallway and see what Dianne Feinstein is going through? Do you really want to do that? I don't understand it. I'm sure she's expecting that I'll do it one more time. It's just 2 years. That's how long you are in office with the House, and then I'll retire. It's like the person trying to gamble and say, I'm going to do it one more time and maybe I can make my money back, or maybe I can make more money. But let's be honest. Nancy Pelosi has more money than God at this point. She doesn't need the money. She doesn't need the notoriety. The question is, why is she doing this? And the reason it troubles me is because as I've said all along, this is a period of time when we should be getting rid of the elderly politicians, especially the old white men, and bringing in younger people. We've got people that maybe have 3, 4, 5, maybe 10 years to live, and they're going to be deciding the future of millennials and Gen Zs. And for my money, that's fucked up. These people should have an opportunity to determine their own destiny, and old people need to get out of the way. Now, if you're 63, a young, vital man like myself, okay, you want to be a representative or a senator? Cool. But when you get over 70, 75, you're kind of walking on thin ice there. When you're that old, almost anything can happen at any time. And do we really need a representative or a senator keeling over on the House or the Senate floor and then having to drag you out? Do you really want to push it that far? Why would you? You have everything now. You don't need anything more. Now, this is what she wrote on Twitter. Now more than ever, our city needs us to advance San Francisco values and further our recovery. Our country needs America to show the world that our flag is still there with liberty and justice for all. That is why I am running for re-election and respectfully ask for your vote. Nancy Pelosi wrote that on X or Twitter or whatever. You know, one of the things she may be doing is trying to figure out who her successor might be, trying to figure out who that could be. Well, if she retired now, I got an idea for a successor. How about her nephew, Gavin Newsom? That would be a nice step from the governorship to the House and ultimately to run for president in 2028. Maybe that's what she's going to do in 2024 when the presidential election happens. She'll retire and then have Gavin come in as the representative in the House. I don't know how it's all going to go, but the fact is, Nancy, you're too old. Grassley's too old. Mitch, you need to go. Dianne Feinstein, you need to go. We need people who can handle the job. Now, I will say, of all those I've mentioned, Nancy Pelosi is still viable. She's still doing a good job. She's very sharp. She's not as quick as she once was. But what she did as the Speaker of the House was tantamount to incredible. You can't fault her for her performance. She's done a great job. And that's why I say, why not quit while you're ahead? I don't get it. It's like that boxer that wants one more fight and then gets destroyed. I hope that doesn't happen to Nancy, but you're risking a lot here as you're entering your mid-80s. The announcement from Pelosi puts an end to any speculation that the California Democrat may be hanging up her hat after more than 35 years in the House. Imagine that, 35 years in the House. What's amazing about that is a term for a representative in the House is just 2 years. 2 years. That means she's had 17, soon to be 18 elections she's had to do. It opens up the opportunity for Pelosi to continue a historic career on Capitol Hill that has landed her at the top of the Democratic caucus, at the center of intense policy and fights in the thick of GOP attacks. Now, the positive thing I will say about Nancy Pelosi sticking around, no longer being in leadership, in 2024, when Democrats get power in the House again, we will have Hakeem Jeffries as the Speaker of the House. And he's certainly qualified, and he will do a wonderful job. Maybe she will offer some tutelage as he's starting out as Speaker of the House. And frankly, you couldn't have a better tutor to get yourself prepared for a very big job. But I'll be honest with you, when he gets to be the Speaker of the House, they can try to compare him to Kevin McCarthy, but that would be a fucking joke. Now, apparently Pelosi was first elected to Congress in 1987, a special election, and has easily won re-election in every race since. The Californian made history in 2007 when she became the first woman to serve as Speaker of the House, returning to the post in 2019. Now, of course, she did step down from leadership, and I will give her credit for that. It's time for younger people to be in leadership conditions or leadership roles. So we'll see what happens. She'll certainly get reelected, and I hope her health holds strong for the next few years and that she can continue to do the great things that she's done up to this point and maybe help along some of the younger folks just starting out their careers. All right, we're coming to the end here. I mentioned the Supreme Court a while back and how they don't have a code of ethics, and frankly, they aren't supreme anymore. They've got so much criminality and corruption going on in that Supreme Court. I don't know how anybody could revere that institution. Now, Justice Sam Alito, part of the U.S. Supreme Court's 6-judge conservative majority, said Friday he had no intention of stepping back from considering a case involving a lawyer with whom he had spent several hours in interviews earlier this year and who had written two articles in defense and praise of Alito. Now that is a prime example of something you should recuse yourself. If you have a relationship with this person, and if this person is a supporter, why wouldn't you recuse yourself? Well, then he wouldn't be able to pay back all the money he probably took from this motherfucker. Now, Judge Alito said, there is no valid reason for my recusal in this case. You're a Supreme Court justice. If you can't see it, who can? This is pure and simple corruption. There's only one reason why you're not recusing yourself, because you owe this guy a fucking favor. And you will get no further favors from him if, in fact, you do recuse yourself. Now, the lawyer is a guy by the name of David Rivkin. He works for Baker Hostetler, LLP, major law firm with more than 1,000 attorneys and offices in 17 cities in the U.S. He's one of the members of a team of lawyers representing the plaintiff in the case Moore versus United States, which involves the challenge to the 2017 tax cut law pushed through Congress by Republicans. Now, as part of the law's overhaul of the corporate tax system, it required companies with profits held overseas to make a one-time repatriation, which was then taxed. So there's the rub. They're fighting against a tax cut or a tax adjustment that Biden made, and Rivkin doesn't like it for obvious reasons, and his buddy Judge Alito wants to give him a hand. Rivkin was also a co-author for 2 articles appearing in the Wall Street Journal's op-ed section in April and July. I mean, this past April and this past July. The latter caused a stir because in it, Alito said Congress had no constitutional grounds to impose ethics rules on the court. So right there, Alito showed us that he doesn't know fuck all about fuck all and should not be a judge, let alone a Supreme Court justice. Now, in an August 3rd letter to Chief Justice John Roberts seeking Alito's recusal, Senator Richard Durbin, chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, said Alito's actions created at least the appearance of impropriety. Durbin wrote, Mr. Rivkin's access to Judge Alito and efforts to help Justice Alito air his personal grievances could cast doubt on Justice Alito's ability to fairly discharge his duties in a case in which Mr. Rivkin represents one of these parties. Alito called the request from Durbin and 9 other Democratic senators unsound. You know what's unsound, Alito? It's taking money from people and then offering favors in return. That's unsound. That's criminal. That is corrupt. Now, Alito continued to write, when Mr. Rivkin participated in the interviews and co-authored the articles, he did so as a journalist, not an advocate. The case in which he's involved was never mentioned, nor did we discuss any issues in the case, either directly or indirectly. His involvement in the case was disclosed in a second article, and therefore readers could take that into account. Whether this guy, Rivkin, was representing himself as a journalist or a lawyer isn't the point. The point is, now we know he's a lawyer, and he did an article about Alito. Not just any article. He did an article that was supporting and protecting Alito. Alito had been under a lot of pressure for some of the criminal shit he did, and this fucking clown did an article that supported Judge Alito. Now, whether he brought up this case in that interview or not is beside the point. The fact is he did you did him a solid, or he did you a solid, and now you have to do him a solid. See, this is what I don't understand about Judge Alito. Here's a guy who's a respected Supreme Court justice, and for some reason he doesn't know this thing. Here I am, a college dropout, sitting in my living room, and even I can see the potential impropriety of this whole thing. Alito obviously sees it. He just doesn't want to react to it. He doesn't want to respond to it because he owes this motherfucker a favor. Durbin also said Rivkin represented Leonard Leo. Oh, there's a name we know. Leonard Leo loves to party with Supreme Court justices. Leonard Leo is co-chairman of the Libertarian Federalist Society and a key player in GOP's judicial nominations process. Now, that's what we know about Leonard Leo. Whenever Republicans have to appoint a judge, whether it be Supreme Court or otherwise, Leonard Leo and the Federalist Society are the ones making the decision. They pick them out and hand the note to the Republican congressional folks, and that's who ends up getting appointed. It's ironic that we have members of Congress that we pay a lot of money and put a lot of trust in, and they can't pick out a judge. They have to wait to be told by Leonard Leo who to pick. That in itself seems a little suspect, don't you think? All right, we are going to wrap up the Rational Boomer podcast. I want to thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen, as always. I hope you have a great day. I hope it's a good weekend, a relaxing weekend for all of us. And of course, I'll be back tomorrow.